raymondcamden.com. I have a contact form there. You can send me your questions. I'm not really on the Bird site anymore. I check it maybe once a day or so, but my DMs are open. You're welcome to reach out to me there. I am on Mastodon just because I love to say I toot. And you could reach me at raymondcamden at raymondcamden.com. That's the custom alias I set up, and it's super long, but it's also a nice and easy way to find me. But definitely, please reach out if you have any questions about what I'm talking about today, or about Eleventy, or about the web, or about cats. So when I was initially kind of planning this talk, because like every speaker, I plan way ahead. I don't wait until the last minute, because that'd be really bad. My initial thinking was I would kind of start off by teaching you everything about web components, and then teach you about WebC and kind of tell you what's the same, what's different, et cetera. And because that would all be within 30 minutes, I figured, why not, play violin at the same time? Because if I could do all that in 30 minutes, I could also learn to play the violin and do it simultaneously. I quickly realized that was a bad idea. I'm really good, by the way, at bad ideas. I just have great skill at that. So instead, what I'm hoping to do is kind of quickly talk about web components. I kind of figure a lot of people are getting exposed to them, but I kind of want to, talk about the mechanics a tiny bit, show you a little bit of code. Just going to kind of show you what it's like to build one, but then really spend, of course, most of our time talking about WebC, how it's similar, how it's different, etc. Along the way, there'll be multiple demos. At the very end, I have a link to this slide deck, and that link contains all of the demos. So you can grab it and you can run with it right away. And obviously, I'm going to give some commentary. WebC is still in motion. It's still being worked on. In fact, there's cool features that are not even documented yet. And I have my own opinions about how it should be used, or how I think it should be used. And that may not be the same as what Zach has in mind. An interesting thing about WebC is that I love Eleventy, but I struggled with learning it. I'm definitely still learning WebC. I struggled a bit, and not because the docs were lacking, but just because it was hard for my brain to kind of take in. I had the same issue with Eleventy serverless. It just took me a little while. It took me kind of playing with it to kind of get into the groove of the right way of using it. And I'm finding the same thing with WebC. And so I hope that I can show y'all, what it gives you, why it's nice, what are some things that may confuse you, and kind of give you tools to start using it right away. And we'll just forget about the whole violin thing, since I don't know how to play. So web components, I have maybe 3 slides for that, which is about 300 too few. But the elevator pitch, this was introduced, or talked about at least, way back in 2011. Some time has passed since 2011. You may not be aware. It's 2023. And I am saying that to myself just as much as I'm saying it to y'all, because I'm still struggling with accepting that it's 2023. And now, web components are actually pretty well supported, even in that particular browser. And I'm now talking about IE 11. I myself just started playing with web components maybe 4 months or so ago. I felt like it was a good safe time, and I wanted to try it out and see if it was something that I wanted to add to my development stack. So not only am I learning WebC, I'm also learning web components. It is essentially the ability to create custom elements. Now, it is a shame that the standards committee behind the web have not added cat picture, because if there's anything that should be in the web, I think cat picture should be there. Web components allows me to correct that mistake. So part of the web component spec is the ability to define a custom element, to create a shadow DOM, which is a really complex way of saying a kind of collapsed integrated DOM. I think the best example of that is that if you ever add a input type equals file, and if you've ever built a form, you've probably built a file upload. that's one tag, but it actually renders a couple things, right? It renders a little field where the file name will go. It renders a little button that will show that you will click to open up the file picker. There's a couple things behind that one tag, kind of hidden behind the core root parent tag, and Shadow DOM encapsulates that essentially. I'm grossly simplifying, by the way. And the HTML template tag, and I put an in by that because I've been working with web components and not actually making use of that particular aspect of it so far. So it's not been terribly important to me, but it's part of the spec as well. And I will warn you now, I have a cat fixing to jump up and invade my personal space, but it's all going to be okay. So why would you do a web component, or why would you use it? It's a great way to reduce complexity, a great way to kind of reuse common things. So if on your particular website, you have a way of creating a card UI, if you use Bootstrap, then you've seen card UIs before where it's title, header graphic, and stuff like that. If you're reusing that type of component across multiple parts of your site, a web component's a great way to kind of package that up and also make it a little bit simpler to use. I also think we'll see web components a lot more in libraries. And I'm actually kind of surprised I'm not seeing this more often. Bootstrap doesn't have web components yet. I know, or the last time I checked, I believe they were kind of thinking about doing that sometime soon. But I like Bootstrap. But like, if you've seen the HTML where it's like div class equals tab space, tab one space, et cetera, it's a lot of divs and a lot of classes. I would love to just have like a tabs tag, and then beneath that, a tab tag, just to make it a bit more evident what we're doing. So I think libraries will be a good place where we'll see web components being added. As an example of how it would look on a kind of typical web page, you write it just as if the web standards folks had added a tag called placeholder. There's nothing special about that particular tag. It looks like regular HTML. You do have to then load the JavaScript that defines that web component. And again, this is not a web component class, but I just want to give you an idea of like the size of what it takes to build a web component. It's actually pretty simple. All this particular web component is doing is creating SVG to do a placeholder graphic. And so it has a little bit of logic for like height and width and text and stuff like that. So this is a very minimal, simple web component. And it outputs SVG. I won't click on the live demo because it's the exact same thing as the screenshot. So there is a lot more information. You go to MDN docs. I love the MDN docs. I go there all the time. I will say I struggled with their web components docs. It wasn't very clear to me. It was one of the very few cases where MDN wasn't crystal clear. I put that on me, but I just like to warn people when I talk about it that maybe you will struggle as well. There's a web components.today, which has a lot of links with resources and things like that. And luckily, there's been 12 or so years of blog posts on it of various relative usefulness, considering that things have changed. So that's web components in roughly 5 or so minutes. Let's talk about WebC. So this is components for Eleventy. It lets you ship no or even just less JavaScript. And I am not really a performance expert, but I've heard that no JavaScript runs really, really quick. It lets you use components without having to explicitly import them via script tags, which is pretty nice. You could even replace existing HTML tags, which I immediately thought like that'd be a great way to mess with my coworkers. Do something like if they use an image tag and if their IP is their particular office, replace it with a cat. But I would never recommend people doing that to your coworkers. That's just plain mean. It's also quite a bit more flexible than the web component stack. Obviously, it can be because it's going to be done on the server side during your build process. But I find working in WebC to be a bit more pleasurable than web components because I have a bit more freedom. So in terms of how, you do need the Eleventy 2.x beta. It's been supported in the Canaries for a while, but 2.x is out now. So you should probably just use the beta. All of my demos are on the beta. You do need to install the plugin. You don't have to, I'm sorry, install the plugin. You do. npm install Eleventy plugin WebC. I was thinking about something else that you have to do, but so you install the plugin. And then, once you do that, do not forget to actually add it to your .11d JS. I forget every single time. So please don't be like me. Actually remember to add it to your config file. So after that, what do you do then? So you write a component. You have a couple of options to do that. You can use the new .webc template. And that looks like a bit like so. So I have a file called something.webc. I have regular HTML. And in there, I can call a component called cat that's also going to be defined in .webc. You can use the render plugin. And yeah, that works. I'm not really a fan of that because that's a lot of code. But if you have a liquid file and want to use or call a WebC component, you do have to wrap it in that. And you could make a little macro in your editor to make that easier. I do wish I could just tell Eleventy to parse liquid for web component or for WebC components, but we can't do that yet. You can also pre and post process HTML. That is not recommended if you look at the doc. So I am not going to be showing that today. Instead, I'm going to be focusing on the .webc template. All right, so let's switch to code. I'm always more comfortable in code. And we're going to start off with demo 1. This is my .11y.js file. By the way, I forget the speaker's name, but the speaker yesterday who showed Visual Studio Code and this simple browser, thank you so much. I love you. I have included the WebC plugin, and then I'm going to write a file, index.webc, and I'm going to write a cat tag in there. Now, quick tip for you, if you're using Visual Studio Code, don't forget you can go into your file association setting, and you can associate .webc with HTML so you get nicer code formatting. So let's go ahead and run this particular server. And you are on 8081. We will reload. There we go. So that cat, where in the heck did it came from? Came from my underscore components file. And oops, I don't want that over there. I want you over here. And there it is. That is my WebC component. It's completely static. There's no JavaScript. There's nothing dynamic about it. But I do have multiple HTML elements being rendered in there. And obviously, hot reload works within components just as you would expect it would within the outside as well. So that is the simple version. Let's start kicking it up a notch. So typically, if you're building any kind of thing that you can be reusing, any type of complexity at all, you're going to need to work with attributes. You're going to pass something to the component, and that's going to change how it works. So for example, I may want to pass a width and a height to the cat component. Inside the component, inside my WebC code, I can bind to that value using :with equals, and then the name of a variable. And by the way, that variable can be any page variable at all, including front matter data as well. So another example, and let me kill this particular server, and we'll go into demo 2, and npm run dev. And if we look at this, I once again have my cat component, and in one case, I'm not passing anything. In the other case, I am passing a height and width. And if we look at our component, we'll see it's a little bit off screen here, so I'll add a line break. Still have the image, and this time, though, I'm specifying a height and width. And if I reload this to get the current version, you could see I have a badly stretched picture, and that matches, what did I say? Width of 200, height of 400. So yes, it is expected. And by the way, I could totally fix that particular URL to be nicer. All right. And let me show one more. And are y'all still getting me okay? Sean, can you quickly tell me if you're getting me? Okay, sorry. One of my little apps said it was connected to Wi-Fi, so I freaked out a little bit. I have too many distractions around me. That is the problem. So just to show you kind of one more example, this is another WebC component. Notice that I added some front matter, title. I'm calling a second component called cat2. And in this particular case, I have no problem binding the alt tag to the title. Now, this kind of breaks encapsulation to me. I would not do that, but it does show that any page data is going to be available to your component. So I probably only use things passed in, but you have those options. And one thing that has always been true about Eleventy is that it's very, very flexible, and I appreciate that. So more on attributes. You can also work with text. You can also work with HTML. As you can imagine, if you want to work with text, any HTML would be escaped for security reasons. But inside your component, all you have to use is the @text or @HTML attribute to like a p tag or a div tag, and that content will be rendered out there. In the same code, if we look at test 3, I've included a new caption for my cat. And if we look at cat 3, I have that p tag right there that is bound to that. So let's actually run this so you can see it in action. And there we see our caption being rendered, working as expected. And again, if I wanted to support HTML, I would just change that attribute to @HTML instead. We can also do basic conditionals. Now, I kind of want to like stop right here and say, so WebC is a template language. It's not going to be as powerful as Liquid or Nunjux. And we're going to talk in a minute about like how to get around that. So we have conditionals, and I'm going to show you how that works in a second. But we don't have a way to loop, for example. You would have to use a different language to do that. Luckily, we have a way. So once again, Eleventy provides a way. So within our WebC components, it will be WebC if some value. That could be a variable like an attribute I passed in. It could even be JavaScript, even async JavaScript, and it will just plain work. So I'm going to show one more example in here. This time I'm calling cat4, I'm passing widths, I'm passing heights, I'm passing captions. And the only change that I made was that now I say only render that paragraph if the caption exists. Now, this won't be a great visual change per se, but before this, I would have had an empty p tag in my layout. This helps prevent that. If you viewed source, you would see no paragraph for here and a paragraph for the one with the caption. So web components support slots, and this is going to pretty much act just like real components, real web components. So you have the ability to do a default slot where anything in between the opening and closing tag will be rendered within that particular slot. You can also have named slots where in your component, you do slot name equals whatever. And then in your calling code, you specify a slot for that to be associated with. And this will hopefully make a lot more sense if we actually run this. So we will go into demo 3 and PM run dev, and we will start taking a look. And let me start closing some of these files here because it's getting a little bit messy. And again, all of this code is going to be available on the repository for y'all to play with. Open up my first demo, and you could see that between my opening and closing cat tag, I just have random content. And if I look at that component, the way that it's supported is by just adding the slot tag. So if we reload here, we could see that that is where the caption went. We'll go back to the calling code. This is a picture of a cat. One thing I don't like is the focus keeps going back and forth. But this kind of shows how that works. If I want to get a little bit more complex, here's an example where I show both a default slot, just kind of ad hoc content, as well as a header. And I will show this running, and then I'll show the code behind it. And you see I have a header, and we will edit it just to make sure it's actually working. Of course it is. And then there's my caption. And again, this code here is going to be very similar to what you would do in a web component. And you got to make this a little bit over there so you can see the whole thing. And that works just fine. One little thing that I will point out, because I made this mistake earlier, this is the default slot. It only shows up if you provide content. If you type this, cat2, and then line break cat2, a line break is content. So that would not show the default slot because you sent content to it. You just sent a line break. So keep that in mind. Don't make that mistake like I did. And I was like, oh, I broke WebC. No, I didn't break WebC. So let's talk about JavaScript, because the only thing that makes the web better is by adding JavaScript. And no one has ever gone wrong by just throwing more and more JavaScript at things. I think we all agree, like more JavaScript the better. Gigs and gigs of JavaScript should be added to your site to make it run even better. So in WebC, there's a couple special things that is going to happen. Eleventy is actually going to gobble up the JavaScript, and I'm going to show you an example of what I mean by that. Now, you will be provided a way to load the JavaScript, and that's not hard to do at all. If you don't want Eleventy to gobble up your JavaScript, you could tell it not to do that. And I have run into a couple of cases where I wanted to disable that behavior, and yet again, not to sound like a broken record, Eleventy provides a way. So let's look at an example. We're going to go into demo 4, npm run dev, and we're going to show it breaking first. And I'm actually going to switch to my regular browser. But here's an example, another index.webc, and I'm calling my cat component. And if we go into the cat component, I have added a little bit of JavaScript, a little hello world. So if we go in here, localhost 8081, open up DevTools, we could see that there is no console.log message. And if I view source, Eleventy has stolen my JavaScript. Of course, it runs even faster now, but bad Eleventy. So there's a couple of ways that we could fix it. If I don't want Eleventy to do any kind of bundling, I can go into my component and just do WebC keep, column like that. Come back here, and we'll just reload the view source, and the JavaScript comes out. So that works. I get multiple copies of the JavaScript, probably not what I want. So we're going to get rid of that. And I'm going to show you the proper solution is to tell the page to load the bundled JavaScript. Again, Eleventy saw that in the component. It took that out for me and made it available. And I could use that code in a script tag. And you can see there, script, and I'm asking it to get the JavaScript for this particular page. By the way, and this kind of confuses me at times because I'm using WebC as a regular page, and I'm calling a component, but WebC will always steal away JavaScript. So I have to actually tell it to keep this particular script tag in there. That kind of confused me. It's kind of like how async await, where you can't use await unless you put async on a function. I'm easily confused. If we look at this, this is going to be test 2. We will see hello world. We'll see it one time because even though I have multiple components, Eleventy gobbled the JavaScript and made it available once. And if we view source on this, we will see right there, it replaced that, that at raw with the bundled JavaScript. So a little interesting side note, if you're calling a component from Liquid, So, and here's an example of that. And you can see I have the render template. By the way, don't forget, even though render template's built in, you have to add it to your Eleventy.js. I totally didn't forget that, I swear. The way to load in bundled JavaScript doesn't work on a Liquid page. It only works on a Liquid layout page. So if we go into includes main.liquid, this is the syntax for Liquid. But when I initially tried it on my test3 page, it didn't work. Now, in almost every real Eleventy site, you're going to use layouts, so that won't be an issue. But just going to keep that in mind in case you run into it. Yes, a lot. So guess what? The same thing happens for CSS. And once again, you can disable that if you want. But you also, interestingly enough, get scoped CSS as well, which is really nice. So we're going to go to the next demo. Demo 5 npm run dev, and let me quickly show you what I'm doing. So I have my cat component again, and I also have a regular vanilla type image. If we look at my component, I specified that all images should have a max width of 100. In my mind, I was thinking that's only going to apply to my particular image. That's actually not the case. So if we go in here and load, we can actually see that both images have the same thing applied. Luckily, there's a really easy fix for that. We go into test 2. The only change here I made is that I'm calling a newer version of my component, newer, better version. And literally all I did was add WebC scoped to it. And if we go in here and actually, let me go to the browser, so you can actually view the source. And luckily, I'm still on test 2. And we could see, so that component was first. It has the very small image, the max width of 100. My regular image was left alone. And if we view page source again, we could see by adding scoped, Eleventy added a random prefix to my CSS such that my image is only going to apply to, my CSS for that image is only going to apply to the component. And you could see this particular random prefix was added to the wrapper for this particular component such that it only applies in there. Pretty easy to do. I probably won't play a lot with that because I am horrible at CSS. So you can get a bit more complex with bundling. You can put them in different buckets. So if you wanted like things in the foot of your HTML page instead of the top, you can do things like that. It works basically by just adding a attribute, WebC bucket, and give it a name. And then your get CSS and your get JSS, both of those allow you to pass an optional second argument to specify the name of the bucket. Completely optional. So there is more stuff you can do. You can actually import components via either a local file or NPM package instead of having it within your source code. You can actually take a regular HTML tag and map it to a component, which is freaking magic, I think. And you can also use other languages inside WebC. And I see I'm already at 30 minutes. So I'm not going to run this demo. I'm just going to show you what that code looks like. Because I ran into this right away because WebC doesn't have looping. It doesn't have like if this, then that. I hit that right away. It's not too hard to get away with it. All we can do is use a template tag with a WebC type and an Eleventy type. And in this case, I'm saying it's liquid and markdown. I really didn't use markdown. I just used liquid. I really like liquid. So that's a language I chose, but obviously you can use Nunjux or something else. But because WebC doesn't support this type of logic, all I gotta do is switch it out and everything else works as is. So I can still do slots and things like that. It all just kind of magically works really darn well. So I have more demos, but I also know I've kind of hit that point. I will actually share one quick thing. So this morning, I was thinking about the Google static map API. I'm a big fan of it because it's not really an API. It's just image tags, which makes it very nice and practical to use. And a lot of times you don't need an interactive, draggable, zoomable map. You just need a map and that's it. So I really appreciate that Google has this, give me a URL and I'll give you a map. That's also why I really love Cloudinary, because they have a lot built in by just using simple URLs. I thought about building a web component that would make it easier to use the Google static maps. And then I realized how stupid of an idea that was, where I would take an easy image URL, convert it into JavaScript that would end up rendering just an image URL. But that doesn't apply to WebC because it's going to end up being at build time just a URL. So if you actually do download this repository, I built a WebC component for Google Static Maps that takes the logic, generates the image for you, and just makes it easier to use. So for example, that is a map for Lafayette. I just pass in a location and a zoom level. And this is a map for Lake Charles. So I wrote this morning in like 5 minutes. What I love is that the output to this is going to be just freaking image tags, no JavaScript at all. I do love JavaScript, but no JavaScript is even better. So few minutes over, I think, but not too bad. I am definitely open for questions. My cat has joined me off camera here. Maybe she'll make an appearance as well.
Thanks, Ray. That was really great. WebC is much more powerful than I remember. I saw an early demo, and as you were going through each demo, I was like writing all these questions down furiously, and then the next demo answered some of those questions. So I have a handful that I want to ask you, but a reminder to all of you in the audience that you can use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen, add your questions in there, and we actually already have a couple, so I'll start with those. The first one comes from Daniel, and I think you mostly answered this near the end, but I'm going to ask it anyways. So Daniel says, is there a way to make WebC components work with Markdown in Eleventy, like for a figure and an image component?
Yeah. So I'll go back to code, and my cat will let me. She's right by the mouse. So where I had right there, where I'm basically saying, hey, I'm in a WebC file, but I need to use Liquid, I could use Markdown as well. So that should just work.
And so because you have two in there and you had the comma between them, it's gonna process Liquid first, and then it's gonna process Markdown after that?
Yes, and I am 90% sure that's gonna work well. Here's those maps just for the heck of it. Let's just do hello world and see what happens. And of course it worked. I never doubted it for a minute.
Amazing. Actually, since we're talking code, I'm going to jump down to Eric's question, who says he's curious about looping in WebC. So you mentioned that you have that if attribute that you can use, but if you're going to loop content, do you have to get into Liquid at that point?
Yes, yeah. It wouldn't surprise me if that was added at some point in the future, because it's pretty common. But right now you would need to switch Liquid, or again, Nunjux or Pug or whatever. I believe I saw someone in the community created a shortcode or some other workaround. Basically, there are multiple workarounds for doing it. It's not native really to WebC yet.
Okay, and you can then you were showing your template in WebC, but you had components as WebC files as well. So let's say you had like a gallery component, and you were going to have individual gallery items in there that you could use Nunjux or Liquid to generate a loop, but then you could put that subcomponent inside that loop theoretically, right?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, next question from Derek. Derek asks, what are the advantages of using WebC over writing standard web components and using them in Eleventy?
So first off, less JavaScript. You will still need some. You still may need some JavaScript. So Adobe, my company, we have a PDF embed library that allows you to put a PDF on your website, and that involves some JavaScript. I can, and I built a WebC component for that. I still have to ship the JavaScript for our library. What I don't have to ship is the default kind of web component, like register this component. So you can ship definitely less JavaScript, and in some case, no JavaScript. So I built a placeholder web component that uses SVG. My thinking is that I don't want to rely on an external placeholder service, but I need to use placeholders, for my site. That uses JavaScript to create SVG. The same thing in Eleventy ships with no JavaScript at all. It just outputs the SVG I need.
Do you feel like there's a breaking point in there somewhere where, for example, let's say you're going to have something that's more like really interactive. Maybe instead of a static map, you're going to have like a typical interactive map, and you're going to add markers to it and that sort of thing. Is WebC still practical in that case, or do you maybe move more towards a native native component at that point?
It depends. I would say look at what you're building. If I was using Eleventy, I would default to WebC probably, just knowing that I could ship less JavaScript. But I would keep open in my mind, like if I'm banging my head against WebC and like, oh, why is this not working? I would punt and I would switch to a regular web component.
I like that. So you start with the simple, which is WebC. Yeah. You have to do less work, and if it's not solving your problem, then you can go more native from there. Okay, Daniel clarified his question. So it didn't mean Markdown inside of WebC file, but meant can you use WebC inside of a Markdown file? But I'm thinking, yeah. Well, I'll let you answer.
Yeah, no. So that goes back to my liquid example in demo 2, demo 4, right there, where you have to do render template, which I don't care for. And I've said that on Mastodon that like I would really like a way, even if it means more processing during build time, I would love within Liquid to be able to say, hey, if you see cat, it is a web component. I wouldn't even mind, putting front matter to like specify like where cat is. But yeah, this is what you have to do for now.
Okay, that makes sense.
Oh, now, I should say,
oh yeah, go for
Mark. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
No, I was going to say, I'm actually not sure what you would do in Markdown. I've not used the render template plugin in Markdown. I think it works there, but like I use Liquid all the time, so that's kind of like my default.
And I don't know what the default settings are in version 2, but I know that at least in my site using Eleventy is heavy on Markdown, and I believe that I had to specify what the rendering engine was for Markdown. So I think I had to tell it, hey, I want you to process Markdown as nunjucks first and then run it through the Markdown processor. So you have to make sure that short codes line up and everything.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so you have some previous experience with Vue and maybe some other UI frameworks or component frameworks as well. You seem really excited about these web components. How do you compare that to some of these like arguably more popular but and maybe more featureful UI libraries like?
Yeah. So my first experience with a component like experience, I guess, was Vue components, and it's very compelling to have a single file component where you have HTML and it's nice, it's by itself. I hate HTML and JavaScript. That's why I'm not a fan of React. I look at React and I shudder. And that's not to say React is bad. I know React is a little bit popular, but it's not for me. When I look at like a Vue component, having that HTML by itself with a little bit of markup inside for dynamicness, and then having JavaScript and then having CS, I like that separation. When I started to look at web components and it's all JavaScript, or typically, or at least in my experience, I still liked it, but I kind of wish that within one file I could have a separate HTML thing. And then there's ways to make that a bit nicer. WebC feels closer to view components to me because I feel like I get that that ability to write HTML and not have it in my JavaScript, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So yes, yep. And so I imagine it would be, if you were writing like a svelte component, it would be a little bit similar to where it feels a little bit more natural rather than I'm learning this whole new syntax for building a component.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Last question. So we heard from Simon McDonald yesterday, who's helping to build Enhance, which is really going heavy into the web component space as well. And they're more on the server side rendering side of things. And I'm just curious to get your take. Do you feel like, even though web components have been around for more than 10 years, we're hearing a lot about them. Do you feel like, is this popularity going to continue to grow? Are we going to see some more frameworks pop up? What does the next year or two, do you think, look like for web components?
I'm horribly bad at predicting the future. I do kind of feel like components are a better fit for people who make libraries. Like if I was Adobe and I was shipping a PDF embed thing, I think a web component would be great for that. It's easier to use our stuff if you just drop a tag into your HTML. So I think we'll see more of that. Like I have to think Bootstrap at some point will adopt a web component version. So I think we'll see movement amongst libraries. I do think developers will use it more and more, especially with WebKit now supporting it well. It doesn't support part of it, but it supports it enough for sure. So I think in the next couple of years, we'll see a gradual growth in it.
Okay, great. I tend to agree, and I'm really excited because it felt like there was some potential, I don't know, 8 years ago or so, and just kind of quieted down, and now we've got some noise. So yeah, let's see where this goes, right?
Mm-hmm.